This is one of the biggest seasons in Nebraska football history. And because of that, there's a lot of questions for the Huskers and Matt Rhule going into 2024. So recently, I polled you guys, the fans, on what your biggest concerns were going for the Huskers. So in today's video, I'm joined with a special guest, Justin Adams from the Nebraska Voice of College Football. And we're going to be answering your guys' Q&As in detail about Nebraska. So Justin, thanks for joining the show today. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Appreciate you having me on again, and appreciate working with you as usual, and love the content, man. Yeah, excited to get this one going.
Yeah, so let's just start it off with the number one question for Nebraska, and this has been the storyline all offseason. It's Dylan Raiola. Now, a lot of people love to talk about his ceiling. Oh, what could Dylan Raiola potentially be? Now, this question not only talks about what Dylan Raiola's ceiling is, but what his floor is. So what are your expectations for Dylan Raiola? And yeah, answer the question, what's the ceiling, what's the floor for him?
Yeah, so with Raiola, you know, we see a lot of the characteristics of a guy who's advanced beyond his years. But when it comes to what Nebraska is going to ask of him, they're probably still not going to ask him to do too terribly much. So, you know, I'm not expecting gaudy numbers, but, you know, when I was asked about this before, I was kind of in the range of, you know, a ceiling of maybe 30 touchdowns, you know, maybe 7 interceptions, and that's a ceiling, you know. And then, but what I'm expecting realistically is for him to go out there and be able to manage the game effectively, you know, get where they want, you know, kind of wanted Jeff Sims to be last year, around a 65% completion percentage, and you know, just really manage the game well. And I think he'll finish somewhere, you know, in the mid 20s touchdowns, maybe low 20s, with probably around that 63% completion percentage, and maybe, you know, maybe double-digit interceptions. We'll see. But I think 20 and 10 is kind of a floor as far as touchdown to interception ratio, and maybe about 30-8 is, you know, kind of what I'd expect on a ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Dylan Raiola's floor in particular, I think, you know, it could be rough for Dylan. I mean, a lot of times these true freshman quarterbacks, they struggle. They're not used to the speed of the game. They're not used to playing against Big Ten defenses. So that's one thing that I could absolutely see, you know, worst case scenario for Dylan. And it should be mentioned that Nebraska quarterbacks, they get banged up. It hasn't been since 2017 where a Nebraska starting quarterback played the entire year. You know, if the odds stay the same, yeah, Dylan Raiola will probably get injured. So that's absolutely his floor. Now, what's Dylan Raiola's ceiling? Because a lot of people like to throw around, oh, Heisman, all Big Ten. I'm not going to go that far. What I'm looking for from Dylan Raiola is just to be a consistent quarterback. Okay, what you get this week is going to be what you get next week. You know, and if that happens, yeah, I could absolutely see him be a freshman All-American, probably nothing more. But that's all you need if you're a Nebraska fan. We have no business to be greedy, and hopefully he does have that season. So, yeah, definitely looking at Dylan Raiola. That's been the big storyline. But talking about this season, right, there's a lot of key games for Nebraska. What is one game you have circled that is the most important for the Huskers, not only to play well in, but win for 2024?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of emphasis is put on the Colorado game, and naturally that's probably most people's answer, but I'm going to move it to later in the calendar year when the going gets really tough. I think the USC game is a very big game in terms of how the rest of the season is going to go, because I think, you know, with USC right now, of course, Lincoln Riley is a great coach. You know, USC is probably going to be there at the top, around the top, you know, if they can get that defense situated. But we catch them in a year where Miller Moss is coming in. You know, Caleb Williams leaves, Miller Moss comes in. They got a new defensive coordinator over there, and a lot of turnover. They're expected to have an improved defense, as it was absolutely abysmal last year. And so it would be a good test for Nebraska in that game, because it's an offense, you know, an offensive showcase with USC. You know, they are very, very offense driven, not a lot of defense. So that'll be a game where Nebraska has the opportunity to be able to keep up with a good offense against a defense that's probably not going to be as good as Nebraska's. And I think in that instance, it's going to be really interesting to see which style wins, whether it's the defensive kind of physicality of Nebraska, or whether it's the, you know, all offense, no defense kind of flashy style of USC. And, you know, with the games following that, I think that's going to be big. I think if Nebraska can pull that one off, that'll set the wheels in motion for a potential 9-win season.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good pick, and that would, you know, put Nebraska on the map. That'd be one of those statement games we can look back to at the start of the Matt Rhule era. So, yeah, you mentioned that Colorado game. I know that's the easy pick. A lot of people would probably say that. I, just like you, am not going to pick that game. I'm actually going to go to the middle of the season, Game 7 against Rutgers. And, that's a tough game. You're going over to Piscataway. You're playing a Rutgers team that honestly is a lot better than, what most Nebraska fans think of them. They've made 3 straight bowl games. Now, the reason why I think it's the most important for Nebraska is this is the last game in that 7-game starting stretch going into your last 5 games, which are a lot tougher. You've got to win this game. It's coming off of a bye week. The team is going to be prepared. They're going to be rested up. A lot of these injuries are going to get healed. You've got to win that game. And ideally, you're sitting there with about 5-6 wins at that point, and you're staring Ohio State dead in the eyes, and hopefully you can hit that last 5 games in stride. So that Rutgers game is super important. If you lose that game going into the Final 5, it's going to be rough for Nebraska, and we might be in a very similar position to last year where you lose out and don't make a bowl game. So, yeah, I have my eyes on that Rutgers game. But let's take it to the next question. Somebody asked, the big talk recently has been Nebraska recruiting, specifically Michael Terry, 5-star wide receiver, and 4-star edge rusher Dawson Merritt. Now, besides those two, who is your number 1 recruiting target that you want Nebraska to land?
And I'm aiming high here, but Douglas Utu, offensive lineman, he is one of those talents. And if people have seen my film review about offensive guards, especially just offensive linemen in general, one of the, biggest things that separates a guy, a 5-star guy like a David Sanders or, a high-level guy like a Utu from the rest is their versatility and their ability to do everything. I had the Broderick Show one where he ended up going to Auburn, but he was very much a smaller, rangier type of guard where he was really good at pulling, really good footwork, really quick, operated well, in that offense and that style of offense. But you get a guy like Utu, and that guy's like a game breaker on the offensive line. He is a guy who's going to be able to not only pull, he's going to be able to, bully guys, out physical them, out footwork them. It's one of those guys that you get a centerpiece like that on your offensive line, and the sky's the limit from there. And especially, with Dylan Raiola, being the 5-star quarterback and basically the Ferrari Rolls Royce of the offense, you got to protect him. And one of the biggest ways to protect him the biggest way to protect him is your offensive line. And so I've been really hammering in on the recruiting of the offensive line. And I think that to me is the biggest addition we could get.
Yeah, me and you have talked about how important it is to recruit the pipelines at an elite level, offensive line and defensive line. So I was considering both of those positions, but I actually took it to the linebacker room with my pick, and this is Christian Jones. Now, 4-star prospect, the number 1 player in Nebraska. He's not the most talented guy the Huskers are going after right now, but the reason why I think he's the most important just goes back to trying to lock down the state. Yes, Matt Rhule's done a very good job at getting these Western Nebraska guys, getting guys from Lincoln and the rest of the Omaha Metro, but it's these top-end players from Omaha that you've got to get if you're trying to literally lock down the border. Christian Jones, the player who, is about as highly coveted as any Nebraska player the last decade. He's considering schools like Oklahoma, Florida, Notre Dame, Auburn. And for that reason, I don't think Nebraska is really in his top 3, even top 2 right now. Hopefully that changed on his official visit last weekend. But, he's a player who might honestly want to get away from Omaha, might want to go see the world and see a different state. If you can perhaps convince him to stay and go to Lincoln and could be a Nebraska Cornhusker, you can get anyone going forward. So that's really big that the Cornhuskers are in the mix for him and hopefully can get it done with Christian Jones. So, yeah, Douglas Utu, good pick there, 5-star offensive lineman. Doesn't get much better than that. But let's go to the team this fall, specifically the offense and the defense. What is one position group that you want to surprise you this year that might not be the best right now, but you're hoping it could take a step and be one of the better in the Big Ten?
So my cheatsy answer was special teams. Of course, want to see that get better. But I think overall, the cornerback room, I know we want to surprise us, but let's take it one step further. And I want the jump that and I'm sticking to offensive line here, the jump that the offensive line makes to actually make a big enough jump to where fans actually start giving respect and credit to the offensive line. And in the Big Ten, it's so imperative to have a good offensive line, right? So we need them to take that jump. And now with, kind of the guys that are in there currently and those guys developing, and then you add Micah Mazuka to that line as well. A guy that comes from the SEC, was very good at Florida, played the best in the biggest games. and you really start to see what this line can become. And so, expectations for the line from most people are, I think, a lot lower than mine and yours, right? And so I want to see that jump to where people are starting to talk about our offensive line, and fans are starting to change their opinion on our offensive line to be a little bit more favorable. But yeah, that and special teams. Special teams was my first answer, just because we need a kicking game. We got to be able to score points. I don't care what our quarterback is. We got to be able to score points, because we're not going to be able to get points out of plenty in the first year under Raiola. It's going to happen occasionally, but there's going to be a struggle at times where we're going to have to kick field goals to be able to win the Big Ten, and we're going to have to be able to win the field position battle.
Yeah, I'm going to take it to the defensive side of the football in my answer. And, we could talk about the cornerback room, but I'm going to go with the linebackers. I think a lot of people expect more of this linebacker room than really what I'm seeing, of the returning production. I mean, you lose your two most productive backers from last year, Luke Reimer and Nick Henrich. You're adding one guy, Stephon Thompson, who, don't get me wrong, was very productive at Syracuse, but he got to spring camp and he was not in football shape. He was not really what we expected of him to be. Now, Matt Rhule said he's changing that. He should be ready to go in fall camp at 100%. But, you're hoping that he can get back to that Syracuse level. But after that, you're looking at a bunch of guys who really aren't proven. Makai Gabeir, you're hoping he steps up. You're looking at, John Bullock, who was a past walk-on, who's been productive, but you're hoping, can take that next step. Buda Wright's another player who was productive last year. Same deal there, can take that next step. Then after that, Vincent Shavers, MJ Sherman, who really struggled last year. A lot of people thought he was going to be a lot better. He was not. So that linebacker room is a staple in the 3-3-5, and it's not looking good for the Huskers right now. I'm praying a guy like a Makai Gabeir can step up, or a Vincent Shavers can play as a true freshman and, really make a difference in that linebacker room. So that's really my concern. But let's go to a big storyline around the Nebraska football program, keeping it with the defense. Somebody asked, what do you guys think? Does Tony White stay with the program after 2024?
Yeah, so this is a tough question to answer, right? Because this is very dependent on what jobs open up this offseason, right? So this is definitely subject to change. I do think that Tony White will receive offers. And I do think I would give it probably about I don't know, man. I'm kind of like 60-40 that he stays almost. But like I said, it's hard to answer this question without knowing what jobs will be open. I think he's here beyond 2024. But I am saying that, understanding that things can change very quickly. And I just see the fact that he didn't take the UCLA job at his alma mater as a sign that maybe he wants to build something here, or just wait on the right opportunity. And if he's going to wait on the right opportunity, I can't predict that that's going to happen in 2024. It may be one of those things where if he's willing to wait on UCLA, he might be willing to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you. I think this will be his last year with Nebraska. And really, there's one reason why, and it's because a lot of these Husker fans, they expect this Nebraska defense to be a top 15, top 10 unit this year. In order to do that, Tony White is going to be an even bigger prime candidate for these head coaching spots. And, one thing that Matt Rhule said in the past is that he's been on the phone with multiple ADs around the country, pitching Tony White to them, saying, hey, this is why you should hire this guy. I mean, Matt Rhule is the definition of a positive employer. He's trying to get his guys to bigger and better. So that's really why I think Tony White's going to move on. I do expect Nebraska to take that jump, and I think he's ready to be a big-time head coach. I remember when he was at Syracuse, Dino Babers, the past coach there at the Orange, he said he was shocked that Tony White took a lateral job to go from the Syracuse defensive coordinator to be the Nebraska defensive coordinator. He said Tony White's going to be a head coach. I don't know why he did that. So it's about time Tony White gets a spot. I know it's hard for Nebraska fans to admit that or accept that, but if you really think they're going to take a step in 2024, he's going to be an even bigger candidate, and it's deserved. So that's my answer there. Again, I would love to have him back. He's the real deal, but we'll just have to see what jobs open up and what the coaching carousel looks like. So let's go to a pretty unique question. What is your biggest my guy on the team going into 2024? Now, what I mean by that is, what is one obscure deep cut player that, a lot of fans might not know the name of, that you're really expecting to break out and be kind of one of those players you can look back on and say, hey, I called that.
Yeah. For me, that's Quentin Ives. And when I did my Jamarian Parker film breakdown, I compared his film to Quentin Ives because it looked very similar. Now, Quentin Ives, of course, played receiver in high school as well. So Quentin Ives is a do-it-all type of running back, and I feel like on the heels of Emmett Johnson, Dante Dowdle, Gabe Irvin, Ramir Johnson, those guys are really kind of taking some of the, focus away from what Quentin Ives can be. And Quentin Ives can just be that do-it-all guy, that playmaker that this offense wants in the backfield. And there's a reason that they got a guy like Jamarian Parker, and guys like Ramir Johnson, because they're going to utilize them. And Quentin Ives is one of those guys that can move around. You can throw him in the slot. You can put him in multiple backfield looks and be able to use screen passes, get him in space. So when looking at Quentin Ives' film, he's from New Jersey. They play a very physical style of football there, so he's used to the physicality. And redshirted last year, so it's one of those guys that I think is going to be able to come onto the scene in just the way Nebraska wants to utilize their running backs in the way I think they will, where they're going to have a good rotation of those guys. But again, the positionless 49er style of offense, that leads me to believe that he is going to be utilized at his full skill set. And if he is, watch the film, look out. He is a very good player and can be a game breaker.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go to the defensive side of the football. A true freshman, you might think who I'm going to say. It's not Vincent Shavers. It's actually in the secondary. This is Larry Tarver. This is a player who got a lot of applause throughout winter conditioning and spring ball from both Matt Rhule and a lot of the veteran players. When they were talking about some of these freshmen who are really making a difference, Larry Tarver was always one of the first guys they mentioned. They say that he's different, that he was ready to go when he got on campus. He's from Miami. He was a high 3-star DB. And those Miami defensive backs, they get to the league at a higher rate. So again, Larry Tarver, a guy who, when I was breaking down his film, he does it all. Great speed, really good height, really good ball instincts. Has the ability, again, to go up and swat that ball down, go up and get an interception. And Larry Tarver, in a secondary room that we're both concerned about, I could absolutely see him break out in fall camp and really get some playing time and, go into his true sophomore season next year as the unquestioned starter. So that's really one of my guys, and watch out for him. So yeah, that's going to do it for the questions. Now I'm going to leave you with one more, and this has been the big question. What do you think Nebraska's record will be? Just quick fire here. What is it?
8-4.
8-4. I'm going to go a little bit less. Nebraska's betting line is sitting at 7-5 right now. I've told people if I were a betting man, I would not touch that betting line. I'm going to say 7-5. Nebraska has not went over on their over-unders in a very long time. I think it'll stay that way, unfortunately, but you're going to take 7 wins every day of the week. So I'm going to say 7-5, just one less, but that's still a good record. So yeah, those are the biggest Nebraska questions going into the year. Thank you to all the fans and subscribers who submitted those. And yeah, let me know down in the comment section below. Do you agree with our takes? Do you disagree? And I want to thank Justin Adams again for coming on my video. Again, if you're not subbed to him over there at the Nebraska Voice of College Football, do so. I will link that in the bio. But thank you, Justin, once again. And guys, that'll do it for us here on the Wilson Sports Channel. As always, folks, go Big Red, go Matt Rhule, and see you in the next one.